think I'm playing? Look at me.
David, please, you're hurting
Shut
me.
up. You owe me.
Oh.
You see this? Huh? You're gonna listen now. Damon. What is...
Whoa,
Hey!
The dispatch radio crackled with static at precisely 3:14 on a Thursday afternoon. Detective Rachel Thornton sat alone in her unmarked sedan, parked beneath the yellowing leaves of an old maple tree on Westbrook Avenue. She had been reviewing witness statements from a string of violent robberies, her coffee growing cold in the cup holder beside her. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dashboard as she turned another page in the thick manila folder. Then the call came through. A suspect they had been hunting for nearly 7 months had been spotted in the commercial district near the university. In that single moment, everything Rachel had been working towards suddenly crystallized into sharp focus. The operation she was about to lead would push her further than anything she had faced in her 17 years of police work. The man they were pursuing had become a ghost, slipping through their fingers time after time. Now Rachel would have to shed her identity completely and become someone else entirely if she wanted to finally bring him down. This story is one that stayed with me long after I first heard it. If you're watching this for the first time, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me when I say you are going to want to follow this all the way to the end. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Detective Rachel Thornton had spent nearly 2 decades building a reputation that preceded her through every precinct in the region. At 41 years old, she had worked cases that ranged from narcotics trafficking to organized crime syndicates, but her true specialty had always been undercover operations. There was something almost uncanny about her ability to disappear into a role. She could become anyone: a struggling single mother, a corporate executive, a homeless woman on the street corner. Her colleagues in the Millbrook Police Department often joked that she had missed her calling as a Hollywood actress. But Rachel understood that her real gift was not performance. It was perception. She could read people the way others read books, picking up on micro-expressions and subtle shifts in body language that revealed what someone was really thinking. That instinct had saved her life more times than she cared to count. The case that brought her to this particular moment had been building like a slow-burning fire for the better part of 7 months. A 27-year-old man named Damon Reeves had emerged as the prime suspect in a series of armed robberies that had terrorized communities across 4 counties. The pattern of his attacks was disturbingly consistent. He would select young victims, often high school or college students, approaching them in isolated areas like parking garages and empty lots near educational campuses. His approach was always the same. He would play the part of a confused traveler or someone in need of directions. His demeanor would be friendly and non-threatening. Then, when his target was close enough, he would produce a weapon and demand everything they had. What made Damon Reeves particularly dangerous was not just his willingness to commit robbery. It was his apparent enjoyment of violence when his victims did not comply immediately. Each attack seemed to escalate beyond the previous one. Witnesses described a man who seemed to feed on the fear he created, who took pleasure in the power he held over people who were helpless to resist him. The most recent incident had crossed a line that made this case personal for everyone in the department. A 16-year-old girl named Sophia had been leaving her part-time job at a small bakery near the Riverside shopping district. It was early evening, and the sun had just begun to set behind the buildings. Sophia had been on the phone with her younger brother, laughing about something that had happened at school that day. She told him she would be home in 15 minutes and that she would help him with his math homework before dinner. That was when Damon Reeves appeared from between 2 parked cars. He asked Sophia if she knew where the nearest gas station was located. She paused her conversation and turned to help him. The moment she pointed down the street, his entire demeanor changed. He demanded her wallet, her phone, and the keys to the old Toyota Corolla that her parents had given her for her 16th birthday. Sophia was confused at first, unable to process the sudden shift from helpful interaction to violent threat. That hesitation cost her dearly. Reeves struck her across the temple with the grip of his handgun, a blow that fractured her orbital bone and left her unconscious on the pavement. When she woke up in the hospital 3 hours later, she required emergency surgery and 14 stitches to close the wound near her eye. The doctors told her family that she was fortunate not to have lost her vision entirely. The attack on Sophia became a turning point for the investigation. Her father was a recently retired detective who had spent 30 years with the Millbrook Police Department. He had trained many of the officers now working the case. But even if Sophia had been the daughter of a complete stranger, the sheer brutality of what Reeves had done would have galvanized every detective in the region. There was something profoundly disturbing about a predator who specifically targeted young people because he believed they would be easier to dominate. The department assigned their most experienced investigators to the case, and Detective Rachel Thornton was chosen to lead the undercover component of the operation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A confidential informant who worked at a tire shop on the outskirts of town had overheard Reeves bragging to an acquaintance about his exploits. The informant reported that Reeves seemed proud of what he had done, as if the robberies were accomplishments rather than crimes. More importantly, the informant had gathered crucial intelligence about Reeves's methodology. He was deliberately targeting teenagers and young adults because he believed they were psychologically easier to intimidate. He had been scouting local high schools and the community college campus, watching students and identifying those who appeared isolated or distracted. He was hunting, and his hunting grounds were places where young people should have felt safe. That information sparked an idea in Rachel's mind. It was bold, unconventional, and carried enormous risk. She would pose as a potential victim herself, using her youthful appearance and extensive training to draw Damon Reeves out of hiding. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rachel would position herself in an area where Reeves was known to operate, appearing to be exactly the type of vulnerable young person he preferred to target. When he approached her, backup officers positioned throughout the area would move in for the arrest. The challenge was making the deception convincing enough to fool a predator who had evaded capture for 7 months. Rachel was 41 years old, but genetics had been kind to her. She had always looked younger than her actual age, a fact that had served her well in previous undercover assignments. With the right styling and careful attention to detail, she could credibly pass for someone in her late 20s. But to convincingly portray a college student in her late teens or early 20s, she would need to transform not just her physical appearance, but her entire way of moving through the world. The preparation began immediately. Rachel spent long hours studying surveillance footage of actual students in the areas where Reeves had been spotted. She observed how they walked, with that particular combination of confidence and obliviousness that came from feeling safe in familiar surroundings. She watched how they interacted with their phones, scrolling endlessly through social media feeds while barely looking where they were going. She noticed the way they wore their backpacks, usually slung over one shoulder, rather than properly positioned on both. Every small detail mattered because Damon Reeves was clearly intelligent enough to spot someone who did not belong. The wardrobe selection required equal precision. Rachel chose faded jeans with strategic rips at the knees, the kind that came pre-distressed from trendy clothing stores. She selected sneakers that showed appropriate wear, not new enough to suggest someone trying too hard to look young, but not so worn that they contradicted the image of a college student from a comfortable background. The backpack was crucial. It needed to look authentic, stuffed with notebooks and a laptop sleeve visible through the partially open zipper. She chose a hoodie that was deliberately oversized, the kind of comfortable lived-in garment that students wore to early morning classes. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she applied minimal makeup that enhanced her naturally youthful features without drawing attention. When she examined herself in the mirror at the staging area, even Rachel was startled by how completely different she appeared. The experienced detective with 17 years of hard-won wisdom seemed to have vanished, replaced by a young woman who looked like she had never faced anything more dangerous than a difficult exam. The psychological preparation proved even more demanding than the physical transformation. Rachel needed to mentally inhabit the role of someone who had never experienced real danger, who moved through the world without constantly scanning for threats. She practiced walking with the slightly distracted gait of someone absorbed in their own thoughts, earbuds in, Attention focused on the screen in her hand rather than her surroundings. She rehearsed the startled reaction of an innocent person suddenly confronted by a stranger, the genuine confusion and fear that Reeves would expect to see in his victims. Most importantly, she trained herself to maintain this vulnerable facade while remaining completely alert and ready to transition to defensive action in a fraction of a second. It was like holding two entirely separate identities in her mind simultaneously, one visible to the world and one hidden, coiled, and waiting. The location selected for the operation was a shopping center parking lot adjacent to Westbrook Community College, where Reeves had been spotted on 2 separate occasions in the past 10 days. The site offered excellent sightlines for the backup team to maintain visual contact while remaining concealed. Multiple escape routes existed if something went wrong, and the proximity to the college provided a plausible explanation for a young woman to be walking alone in that area during the late afternoon hours. The tactical team had surveyed every inch of the location, identifying blind spots, planning approach vectors, and establishing communication protocols. Rachel arrived at the staging point nearly 3 hours before the operation was scheduled to begin. The afternoon was cool and overcast, the kind of gray autumn day when everything seemed muted and slightly unreal. She went through final equipment checks with Detective Marcus Chen, who was coordinating the backup team. Despite her transformed appearance, Rachel was carrying her service weapon in a specially designed holster that sat flat against her lower back, invisible beneath the loose fabric of her oversized hoodie. A miniature microphone was concealed in the collar of her jacket, connected to a wireless transmitter that would allow the entire team to hear every word of her interaction with Reeves. The earpiece in her right ear was small enough to be mistaken for a wireless earbud if anyone looked closely. The backup team consisted of 8 experienced officers positioned at strategic points throughout the parking lot and surrounding area. 2 were seated in unmarked vehicles at opposite ends of the shopping center, engines off but keys in the ignition. 2 more had taken positions inside a sandwich shop with large windows that provided a clear view of the target area. Another pair was stationed near the college entrance, dressed as facilities workers conducting routine maintenance on a sprinkler head. The final 2 officers were positioned on the roof of a 2-story office building adjacent to the parking lot, providing overwatch and a bird's-eye view of the entire operation. Each officer had memorized the arrest protocols and practiced their approach multiple times during rehearsals the previous day. As Rachel walked toward her designated position in the parking lot, she felt the familiar shift happening inside her mind. The experienced detective who had faced armed suspects, corrupt officials, and dangerous criminals began to recede into the background. In her place emerged a different person entirely, a young woman whose biggest worry was probably whether she would make it to her next class on time. Rachel's posture changed subtly, her shoulders relaxing, her stride becoming less purposeful and more casual. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through it with the absent-minded attention of someone killing time, rather than remaining alert to her surroundings. Her heart rate increased as the reality of what she was about to do settled over her like a weight. Everything the department had worked toward for 7 months, everything the victims of Damon Reeves deserved, all of it was about to be tested in the next hour. The operation was scheduled to go live at 5:15 in the afternoon, during the window when students typically left the campus for the day. This timing was deliberate and based on careful analysis of Reeves's previous attacks. Every robbery had occurred during this transitional period, when young people were moving between locations and their attention was focused on getting home rather than on potential threats. It was a time of day when parking lots filled with students walking alone, distracted by phones and thoughts of dinner plans and homework assignments. It was the perfect hunting time for someone like Damon Reeves. Rachel positioned herself near a silver sedan that the department had placed in the parking lot specifically for this operation. She began fumbling with her keys, making a show of having difficulty getting the door open. This exact scenario had preceded at least 4 of Reeves's previous attacks. The image of a frustrated young woman struggling with a stuck lock was apparently irresistible to him. It suggested distraction, vulnerability, and an easy opportunity to approach under the pretense of offering assistance. Rachel made herself appear increasingly irritated, sighing audibly and trying the key from different angles. All the while, her peripheral vision was scanning the parking lot, searching for any sign of their target. Detective Chen's voice crackled softly in her earpiece, confirming that all units were in position and the operation was officially live. The weight of that statement settled into Rachel's chest. Everything now depended on her ability to maintain her cover while drawing out one of the most dangerous predators the department had pursued in years. She continued her performance, occasionally checking her phone as if hoping someone might call with a solution to her car troubles. The minutes stretched by with agonizing slowness. She checked her phone, adjusted her backpack, muttered in frustration at her uncooperative door. Other people moved through the parking lot around her, students heading to their cars, shoppers returning with bags from the stores. None of them paid her any particular attention. She was just another young woman having a bad day, unremarkable and unnoticed. I want to pause here and ask you something. Think about how vulnerable this position is. A detective, alone, armed only with the knowledge that backup is watching from a distance, deliberately making herself a target for a violent criminal. Every second of that wait must have felt like an hour. If you have ever been in a situation where you felt genuinely unsafe, you know that particular quality of time, how it seems to slow down and stretch out endlessly. Let me know in the comments if you have ever experienced something like that. And if you are finding this story as gripping as I did, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what happens next. At 5:27 in the afternoon, Detective Chen's voice came through the radio in a barely audible whisper. He had spotted a figure matching Reeves's description entering the parking lot from the eastern access road. Rachel felt her pulse surge, but she forced herself to maintain the frustrated, distracted demeanor of her cover identity. She could not look around. She could not show any sign that she was aware of being watched. She continued struggling with her keys, occasionally glancing at her phone as if hoping for a text message or notification that might distract her from her automotive troubles. Through the corner of her eye, Rachel caught movement on the periphery of the lot. A figure was walking with deliberate purpose across the expanse of parked cars. He was wearing dark jeans and a faded blue jacket, his hands shoved into his pockets against the cool afternoon air. His build matched the physical profile they had developed from witness statements and surveillance footage. His path was taking him directly toward her position rather than toward any specific vehicle or building entrance. This was not someone walking to his car or heading into a store. This was someone with a destination in mind, and that destination was Rachel. She made a show of dropping her keys onto the pavement with a muttered curse. As she bent to retrieve them, she used the opportunity to observe the approaching figure more closely. When she straightened up, turning the keys over in her hand as if checking for damage, she felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. This was Damon Reeves. His face matched the photographs they had assembled from driver's license records and social media profiles. His movements held the same predatory economy that witnesses had described, a casual exterior masking intense focus on his target. Most importantly, his eyes were locked on her with an intensity that sent a primal warning signal racing up her spine. Reeves's approach followed the exact pattern they had studied in preparation for this operation. He maintained a relaxed pace that would not draw attention from other people in the area. His body language projected friendliness and approachability. To a casual observer, he might have been a good Samaritan about to offer help to someone having car trouble. But Rachel could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he was evaluating her, looking for any sign that she was aware of the danger he represented. She gave him nothing, continuing to appear absorbed in her own frustrations, playing the part of a vulnerable young woman who had no idea that a predator was closing in on her. When Reeves was approximately 25 feet away, he called out to her. His voice was warm and friendly, carrying just the right note of concern to put a stranger at ease. He asked if she was having trouble with her car and offered to take a look at it for her. His words were carefully chosen to seem helpful rather than threatening. Rachel looked up with an expression of genuine surprise and relief, thanking him effusively and explaining that her key seemed to be sticking in the lock. She made sure to appear slightly flustered, the way someone might when an unexpected kindness interrupted their frustration. As Reeves moved closer, she noticed details that confirmed his identity beyond any possibility of doubt. There was a distinctive scar on his left hand, running from the base of his thumb toward his wrist. Their files mentioned that scar, a remnant from a knife fight years earlier. His voice carried the same slight rasp that witnesses had mentioned, and beneath his jacket she could detect the telltale outline of something concealed at his waist, likely the weapon he had used to terrorize so many innocent people. Reeves positioned himself between Rachel and the nearest cluster of other people in the parking lot. This was another element of his established methodology. He liked to control the situation completely before making his move, cutting off his victims' most obvious escape routes before they even realized they were in danger. He leaned against the car beside hers, close enough to maintain conversation without appearing threatening to anyone who might glance in their direction. His smile remained firmly in place, but there was nothing warm about his eyes. Rachel played along perfectly, continuing to struggle with her keys, while Reeves offered increasingly specific advice about how to solve her lock problem. The conversation stretched on for nearly 3 minutes, an eternity under the circumstances. Rachel could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, but she channeled that energy into her performance. She laughed at one of his jokes. She shook her head in self-deprecating frustration at her own inability to get the door open. She was the picture of innocent gratitude for the help of a kind stranger. Then Damon Reeves made his move. The transformation was instant and absolute. The friendly smile vanished from his face as if a switch had been flipped. He stepped closer to Rachel, close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke on his breath, and lowered his voice to a whisper that carried absolute menace. He told her that he was going to need her car keys, her purse, and her phone. He told her that if she did what he said quickly and quietly, she would not get hurt. His hand moved slightly beneath his jacket, making it clear that he was armed and willing to use violence if she did not comply. This was the moment his victims always described in their statements, the instant when the helpful stranger disappeared and the predator revealed himself. Rachel responded exactly as impressed by this argument, pointing out that Reeves had approached what he genuinely believed to be an innocent young woman with the clear intent to rob her at gunpoint. The bait might have been fake, but the intent was entirely real. The entrapment defense was dismissed before it could gain any traction. Now I have to ask you to think about this for a moment. Reeves actually believed that he was the victim here. He thought the police had treated him unfairly by outsmarting him. There was no acknowledgement of the terror he had inflicted on 22 innocent people. No recognition that Sophia would carry a scar near her eye for the rest of her life because of him. What does it say about someone that they can commit such violence and feel absolutely nothing for their victims? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have been watching this far, you clearly appreciate these deep dives into incredible stories. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already. The trial itself became something of a landmark case, a showcase for the effectiveness of modern undercover police work when properly planned and executed. The prosecution played the complete audio recording from Rachel's wire, allowing the jury to hear Reeves's threatening words in his own voice. They heard the moment when his friendly tone transformed into something cold and menacing. They heard him demand valuables while making it clear he was armed. They heard the panic in his voice when he realized he had been caught. The clarity of the evidence left absolutely no room for doubt about his guilt or his intentions. The contrast between Reeves's testimony and the reality captured on the recording was stark and damning. He took the stand in his own defense and attempted to portray himself as someone who had simply been trying to help a young woman with car trouble. He claimed that the situation had been misunderstood, that the officers had overreacted to an innocent interaction. Then the prosecution played the recording, and the jury heard him threatening to hurt someone if she did not give him her car keys immediately. The lies he had told under oath were exposed in the most public way possible. His credibility evaporated in that courtroom, and with it, any hope of escaping the consequences of his actions. The prosecution called multiple victims to testify about the lasting impact of Reeves's crimes. Beyond the immediate physical injuries and stolen property, many described ongoing psychological trauma that had fundamentally changed their lives. One young man named Tyler, who had been robbed 8 months earlier, testified that he had dropped out of college entirely because he could not bring himself to cross the campus after dark. A 19-year-old woman described how she now had panic attacks whenever a stranger approached her in public. Another victim talked about the therapy sessions she attended twice a week, trying to overcome the hypervigilance that made it impossible for her to relax in public spaces. The cumulative weight of this testimony painted a picture of destruction that went far beyond any monetary value of what Reeves had stolen. Reeves's mother attended several of the court hearings. She sat in the back row, her face drawn and pale, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. During a brief recess in the preliminary hearing, she approached Detective Thornton in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she apologized for what her son had done. She explained that she had tried to get him help years earlier when she first began noticing disturbing patterns in his behavior. He had been cruel to animals as a child. He seemed to take pleasure in making other children cry. She had arranged for counseling, for medication, for every intervention she could think of. But Damon had refused treatment, become increasingly hostile, and eventually cut off all contact with his family. She had not spoken to him in over 2 years before seeing his face on the evening news. The conversation with Reeves's mother provided a glimpse into the origins of predatory behavior. She described a child who had shown early signs of aggression and manipulation, who seemed to lack the basic capacity for empathy that most people develop naturally. Despite her persistent efforts to intervene, Damon had continued down a destructive path that eventually led him to prey on innocent strangers. There was no single traumatic event that explained what he became, no dramatic backstory that made his actions comprehensible. Some people are simply broken in ways that cannot be fixed, and the best society can do is protect others from the damage they would otherwise cause. The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 22 counts. Damon Reeves was convicted of multiple counts of armed robbery, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted kidnapping. The judge handed down a sentence of 28 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 18 years. Given Reeves's age and the length of the sentence, it was effectively a life sentence. He would be in his 50s before he had any chance of release, and the nature of his crimes made it unlikely he would ever see the outside of a prison again. After the sentencing, Rachel began receiving letters from victims who had followed the case through news coverage. Many expressed gratitude not just for Reeves's capture, but for the evidence that the justice system could actually work. For people who had felt powerless after being victimized, seeing their attacker held accountable provided a sense of closure that nothing else could. Several mentioned that watching Reeves receive such a lengthy sentence had helped them begin to heal from their own experiences. One letter in particular stayed with Rachel long after she read it. It came from a 21-year-old college student named Aaron, who had been one of Reeves's earliest victims, nearly 2 years before the arrest. Aaron wrote that he had been considering dropping out of school after the robbery because he could not concentrate on his studies. Every time he walked across campus, he found himself scanning for threats, unable to focus on anything else. Seeing Reeves sentenced to 28 years had given him the closure he needed to move forward. He had decided to change his major to criminal justice, inspired by the officers who had worked so hard to bring his attacker to justice. He wanted to be someone who protected others the way the Millbrook Police Department had protected him. The success of the Reeves operation brought Rachel something she had not sought and did not particularly want: recognition. She was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences across the country, sharing the techniques and strategies that had made the undercover operation successful. Departments dealing with similar serial predators wanted to learn how to adapt her methods for their own investigations. Rachel accepted these invitations reluctantly at first, but she came to recognize the value of spreading knowledge that might help catch other dangerous criminals. Her training seminars became highly regarded in law enforcement circles. She did not simply teach the mechanics of undercover work, the disguises and the false identities and the tactical positioning. She emphasized the psychological preparation required to convince a dangerous criminal that you were exactly what you appeared to be. The mental discipline required to maintain character while simultaneously planning tactical responses was something that could not be learned from any textbook. It had to be practiced, refined, and internalized until it became second nature. During one memorable training session, a young detective asked Rachel if she had ever been afraid during the Reeves operation. She answered with complete honesty that terror had been her constant companion from the moment she stepped out of her vehicle until the moment the handcuffs clicked shut around Reeves's wrists. The key was not eliminating fear. That was impossible and probably undesirable. Fear kept you sharp, kept your senses heightened, kept you aware of danger. The key was channeling that fear into focused attention and decisive action when the moment demanded it. Rachel's proudest moment came 7 months after Reeves' conviction. She received an invitation to Sophia's high school graduation ceremony. The young woman who had been beaten so badly that she required emergency surgery was now preparing to start college. She had completed her senior year despite the trauma she had endured, had maintained her grades, and had been accepted to study psychology at a well-regarded university. Her plan was to eventually work with other crime victims, helping them navigate the same difficult journey toward healing that she herself had traveled. At the graduation ceremony, Sophia's father found Rachel in the crowd and approached her. His eyes were red, though whether from tears of pride or memories of what his daughter had endured, Rachel could not tell. He thanked her for what she had done, not just for the arrest, but for giving his daughter the chance to reclaim her life. He explained that Sophia had struggled terribly in the weeks after the attack, suffering from nightmares and anxiety that made it difficult for her to leave the house. The news of Reeves's capture had been a turning point. Knowing that he was behind bars, knowing that he would never hurt anyone again, had allowed Sophia to begin the slow process of healing. She still had difficult days, her father admitted, but she was moving forward instead of staying frozen in the moment of her trauma. The conversation reminded Rachel of something her own training officer had told her during her first undercover assignment nearly 2 decades earlier. He had said that the best undercover officers were not simply good actors. They were people who understood, at the deepest level, the ones they were trying to protect. The ability to connect with victims, to see the world through their eyes, to feel their fear and their hope for justice. That was what separated truly effective officers from those who merely went through the motions. Looking back on the Reeves case, Rachel understood that her success had not come primarily from her ability to look younger than her age or from her training in defensive tactics. Those skills had mattered, certainly, but the real key had been her determination to prevent Damon Reeves from creating any more victims. Every element of the operation, from the clothes she wore to the way she positioned herself in that parking lot, had been designed with those victims in mind. The case also reinforced her belief in the importance of teamwork. The undercover operation had succeeded because 8 officers had worked together with flawless precision, each trusting the others to perform their roles perfectly. The backup team had maintained their positions despite watching her interact with an armed suspect, waiting for her signal even when the situation appeared to be spiraling toward violence. Detective Chen later admitted that watching Reeves jam a gun against Rachel's ribs had been one of the most difficult moments of his career. Every instinct had screamed at him to intervene immediately, to abandon the plan and rush to help her. But he had trusted her training, trusted the preparation they had done together, and waited for the signal she had promised to give. That trust had allowed the operation to succeed without any officer being seriously injured. Years later, Rachel would occasionally receive updates about the people whose lives had intersected with the Reeves case. Sophia graduated from college with honors and went on to earn a master's degree in counseling psychology. She now worked at a nonprofit organization that provided support services to victims of violent crime. Aaron completed his criminal justice degree and joined the police force in his hometown, where he specialized in community outreach programs aimed at helping young people stay safe. Other victims moved forward with their lives in their own ways, carrying scars from their encounters with Reeves, but no longer living in the shadow of fear that he had cast over them. The investigation that followed Reeves's arrest revealed disturbing details about how he had operated for far longer and far more methodically than anyone had initially realized. Detectives discovered that he had been using social media to research potential victims, creating fake profiles to follow them online and learn their routines. He kept detailed notes about when they left home, when they returned, where they worked, and when they would be most isolated. This was not random crime driven by desperation or impulsive opportunity. This was calculated predatory behavior that had been refined over years of practice. Reeves had treated hunting human beings like a skill to be developed and improved. The psychological profile that emerged from expert analysis was deeply troubling. Reeves had an almost compulsive need to control and dominate others. The robberies were not primarily about money, though he certainly took whatever his victims had. They were about the feeling of power that came from seeing fear in someone's eyes. The journal entries showed that he was particularly excited by victims who begged or cried, interpreting their emotional responses as validation of his superiority. He believed, in some twisted way, that people who could not defend themselves deserved to be preyed upon by those who were stronger. This worldview explained why he specifically targeted young people and others he perceived as vulnerable. He was not just a thief. He was something far more dangerous. Criminal behavior experts who studied his case agreed that Reeves had been escalating systematically. His early robberies had involved minimal physical contact, just threats and demands. Each subsequent attack had become more violent and more invasive. By the time he attacked Sophia, he was already crossing lines that suggested far worse crimes were on the horizon. The undercover operation had almost certainly prevented kidnappings, sexual assaults, or murders. Stopping Damon Reeves when they did had saved lives that would otherwise have been destroyed. Detective Rachel Thornton proved through her actions that sometimes the most dangerous criminals can be brought down by officers willing to put themselves at extraordinary risk. Her transformation from seasoned detective to seemingly helpless target was not just impressive acting. It was a masterclass in understanding predators and turning their own methods against them. What began as one woman's courage to become bait for a monster ended up preventing countless future victims from experiencing the terror that Reeves had inflicted on 22 others. The ripple effects of that single operation extended far beyond the immediate arrest. Training programs were developed based on its success. Other predators were captured using similar techniques. Victims found closure and began to rebuild their lives. A young woman named Sophia found the strength to not only survive, but to dedicate her career to helping others who had suffered as she had. A young man named Aaron was inspired to join law enforcement and spend his own career protecting the vulnerable. And in the end, that is what justice is supposed to look like. Not just punishment for those who do wrong, but restoration for those who have been harmed. Not just the removal of a threat, but the creation of hope for the future. Detective Thornton understood that her job was never really about catching criminals. It was about creating a world where people could walk to their cars without fear, where young people could help strangers without hesitation, where communities could trust that someone was watching out for them. So let me leave you with a question to consider. We often talk about bravery in physical terms, the courage to face danger, to confront an armed suspect, to put oneself in harm's way. But there is another kind of courage that this story reveals. It is the courage to see the world through the eyes of victims and to dedicate one's life to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. What would you be willing to risk to make your community safer? What kind of courage do you think matters most? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you the way it moved me, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We share stories like this regularly, accounts of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances and finding the strength to do what needs to be done. I appreciate every single one of you who watched until the end, and I will see you in the next one.